Well, look, thanks for coming along, folks. I hope you enjoyed my speech about regulatory standards and councils. If you can get a soundbite out of that speech, then you're more talented than I realised.
Can we get your reaction to the New Zealand post-policy?
Look, get woke, go broke. I mean, we hear about electric planes, glossy reports on climate change, paper cups in the Koru Lounge. What they can't seem to do is take off and land on time. And they say that, the flights aren't empty. I have one of the parts of my job, I fly a lot, and they're just about all full. I'm fortunate that as an MP, I don't have to pay for work flights, but whenever I look at one privately, they're looking at $600 to go from Wellington to Invercargill one way. It's crazy.
Do you think that the Crown needs to sell down its majority shareholding in New Zealand?
Well, it's the only airline where you pay twice, once as a taxpayer and once as a passenger. Now, I just asked the question, what has been the public purpose of owning this airline? What's interesting is they seem to be more competitive in other environments. Their overseas flights seem to be more competitive. Sometimes it's cheaper to go to America than, bloody Dunedin.
Do they have a responsibility to the New Zealand public to offer a service if they are owned by the taxpayer?
Well, the taxpayer has to have a purpose for having all that capital tied up. My question is, what is that purpose if they're not providing a service that is affordable and timely? Instead, they seem to have been distracted by a million other objectives.
So you think we should sell down? You think we should sell off in New Zealand?
Well, it's always been Act's policy that the government should only own something if it's got a clear purpose. They do all this other politically motivated stuff, but they can't take off and land on time for a decent price. So if there's no purpose, maybe there's no reason.
Very specifically, you think we should sell off in New Zealand?
Well, it's always been the ACT Party's position. I mean, we know that the government doesn't have a role in owning commercial businesses, and I think it's now becoming clear they're not actually serving a purpose for the New Zealand taxpayer.
As Associate Finance Minister, are you able to just ask them for the details about where that money is going? Because are you sure it's all greenwashing?
Well, I don't have responsibility for Air New Zealand. If I was the shareholding minister, I'd probably comment differently about them. But all I would say is that when your objectives and your purposes aren't clear, you lose sight of what really matters. And what really matters is taking off and landing on time and doing it for a competitive price. They're clearly failing at that, so then you look at everything else they're doing.
You say that the flights are unaffordable, and then that as a politician your flights are paid for. Do you think it would be better use of taxpayer money to fly on Jetstar or a cheaper option?
Well, I've done that in the past. I've seen Chris Luxon started doing it. Sometimes it is the best option.
You made a promise when you came into Parliament that you would fly Jetstar. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I kept it.
No, you didn't.
I didn't say I'd do it every single flight, but I did do it.
Can I ask you about rates capping? You talked about the timeline, the potential timeline, and then can you just, were you saying that possibly is in place after 2 years?
Yeah, look, I mean, as I recall, the purpose is as I recall, the goal is to get it there in about 2 years. I'd want to check that. I seem to remember it's a 2028 target, but I'd want to double check that before I told you that's the exact date.
Just to clarify, do you think that there should be a rule making it so that politicians have to go for the cheaper option for flight, because that would save taxpayers arguably a significant amount of money?
Yeah, I think it'd be useful if, frankly, MPs were bulk funded and they had an incentive to make savings. That would be the simpler way to do it. Because if you have a rule saying that you have to always take the cheaper flight, and then they take one at 7:30 that costs more when there's a cheaper one at 7, we're going to end up having these crazy arguments about whether you should have gone half an hour earlier to save how much money. But what I've always said is MPs should be given a set budget. I mean, you think about it, it's pretty crazy. Every household and business in this country, you have a travel budget, and that actually limits your emissions. Parliament must be the only workplace in the world where, Parliament must be the only workplace in New Zealand where you have an unlimited travel budget, and as a result, you don't face any penalty for additional flights. And I've said there should be a cap budget for years.
That'd be an interesting concept. How would you get that through?
Well, all parties could decide to do it tomorrow. I remember when I suggested this years and years ago, even the Greens didn't agree to it.
Does your MPs have that?
Do what,
Are
sorry?
you going to decide to adopt that sort of policy in terms
Well, one person can't change the entire parliamentary budgeting.
The ACT Party leader, you said all parties could do it tomorrow. Will ACT be doing
No. If all parties agreed to change the rules for funding Parliament tomorrow, they could. One party can't really do that. I guess you could argue that we're going to, self-flagellate and disadvantage ourselves against other parties, but I think that's probably a step too far.
Members bills for those things?
Do we? No, they're all committed to very important issues, and besides, Parliament wouldn't be subject to a members' bill. It's an internal budgeting issue.
Do you look over your MPs' travel budgets and say, oh, that's looking too high, or like, do you do anything like that?
Yeah, I do. And look, ACT MPs have generally had quite low and reasonable amounts of travel vis-a-vis others. I remember years ago doing a story where the Greens were the highest, and that seems to have happened many times over the years, which I always find kind of ironic.
How many Jetstar flights have you taken?
How many Jetstar flights? Oh, a much larger number than I can count.
Can I get your
Yeah.
Can I get your reflections on Peter Tiffany's comments about the tension between local and central government, and how do you walk that line between, being critical but not going too far, and the relationship between central and local government?
Well, both central and local government have a really clear role to play. One of the purposes of our local government improvement legislation that will pass this year is to say, right, you're not there to do the four wellbeings, you're not there to be We Are the World, you're there to provide a limited number of services that New Zealand just can't provide themselves.
Has the government been totally upfront with the public
Always.
on how you got to that $12.8 billion pay equity figure?
Well, the Treasury does the calculations. I think RNZ reported this widely at the time based on Treasury documents that we also relied on. So you could argue that the Treasury's numbers are all out, but everyone has to rely on them. If Chris Hipkins wants to say that he doesn't trust the Treasury, I hate to think how he's going to be doing his budgeting if he ever gets back in power.
It's not just Chris Hipkins, though. It was Marilyn Waring that looked through the available documents, and all of the advice that underpinned that figure had been redacted. So should the government be upfront about how Treasury got to that figure?
Well, it depends what their reasons for redaction were. I mean, sometimes there are good reasons for redaction. For example, commercial sensitivity, they're in a negotiation. I guess if those reasons had lapsed, then you could release it. But I'm not going to say you should just release information without knowing why it was redacted in the first place.
Should we treat Treasury's advice or Treasury's numbers as sacrosanct?
You have to trust them. They're what we've got, right? I mean, the idea that anything is sacrosanct, no, it's not. But at the moment in New Zealand, we do all our budgeting based on Treasury figures. Now, if you got an alternative, I'm keen to hear it, but it's probably not a few reckons from Marilyn Waring and Chris Hipkins, with the greatest of respect.
I guess the bigger point is that ministers often pick and choose which advice they listen to from officials. So why on that figure, or was that figure ever heavily tested by the government, and was it questioned as to whether it really was that big of a risk?
Well, I'm sure it was, because we were desperate to save the money. I mean, I said at the time, Brooke Van Velden's initiative saved the budget for the government, and that's how big it was. So we had every incentive to make sure the money was real, otherwise we'd be in much bigger trouble financially.
Are you happy with the end of the quarterly reports?
Beg your pardon?
Are you happy with the end of the quarterly action plans?
Am I happy? No, I mean, they were such a great platform for ACT to show its disproportionate policy influence on this government, and for some reason they've been suppressed.
Winston Peters this morning said, thank heavens for that.
Well, all I would say is that when you have more policies to put in them, you quite enjoy them, as we did.
Did he have more policies to put in them?
Look, sometimes you just got to allow the art of subtlety to work its magic, Jamie. I mean, you're taking away the magic. We'll see you later. Cheers.